ferry strategy to ensure reliability for communities?
Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We published our updated vessel and ports plan earlier this year, and Transport Scotland published a consultation report and in its initial responses on the 3rd of September. This confirmed that reliability and resilience as the first priority of the plan. To support that, we are delivering 6 new major vessels for CalMac and procuring 7 new small vessels. The plan also confirms that we will retain a resilience vessel to cover planned and unplanned outages, and also to introduce two vessel summer services on the Little Minch, adding capacity and resilience to the Western Isles and the network as a whole.
Rhoda Grant.
It seems that a day doesn't go by without further delays to the new ferries and breakdowns to the existing fleet. South Uist again bears the brunt of the cancellations. Businesses again are being failed, and added to that, we are now in a period of annual maintenance to the fleet. I see that the Hebridean Isles, which is due to be scrapped next month, is to provide lifeline services to cover. I wonder if the Minister will now admit that there is a requirement for standby capacity to the fleet, and if it's possible to retain the Hebridean Isles in the fleet beyond November to do this. And will he provide compensation to businesses before they're forced off island due to ferry failures?
Minister.
I don't think, Presiding Officer, there has ever been any lack of consideration that a resilience vessel would be required. However, in reference to the boat that she's talking about, it's not possible to retain that one beyond this point, because it would need a major overhaul, and both CMAL and CalMac have anticipated that there will be out for many months as a result of that overhaul, to then only be disposed of when the new vessels come into play early next year. But as I said, the plan that has been set out before is looking at the resilience across all sectors, and I'll be very happy to meet the member to discuss what that looks like as we go forward.
Question number 7, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the recommendations in the recent Oxfam Scotland report, cleared for take-off a private jet tax for Scotland.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The Scottish Government welcomes the contribution from Oxfam Scotland and will consider the taxation of private jets as part of our work to introduce air departure tax. We continue to explore all options to implement ADT in a way that protects lifeline services in the Highlands and Islands, and will work with the UK Government on how this can be achieved in compliance with its subsidy control regime. The UK-wide air passenger duty, including the higher rate, which already applies to private jets, will apply in Scotland until ADT is introduced.
Mark Ruskell.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that constructive answer? Oxfam have calculated that introducing a tax on private jets in Scotland could raise nearly £22 million a year, which is enough to deliver fairer fares on trains that commuters really need. And we heard last week from the First Minister at FMQs that he would be very much in the spirit of embedding such a tax on luxury travel in a future air departure tax. So will the Cabinet Secretary similarly support this initiative, and can he provide more detail on the discussions that his government currently is undertaking with the UK Government on the introduction of an air departure tax for Scotland, and in particular the intricacies around the details of an exemption for the Highlands and Islands? How much progress can we actually see, Cabinet Secretary, in the months ahead on this?
Minister.
The Scottish Government continue to engage constructively with the new UK Government, and will report back on progress on that in due course. But we are very keen, as I'm sure the new UK Government are, to make progress on this issue in compliance with state aid rules and ensuring that we continue to support Highland and Island connectivity. With regards to the specifics in the Oxfam report, I can say that I've asked officials to engage with Oxfam on the substance and the details around their calculations. Having had a quick look at the report myself, I would have to say that it doesn't appear at first glance to have taken into account behavioural impacts, which is interesting considering that the primary thrust of the report is to reduce travel by private jet in the interests of climate change. But I said I asked my officials to engage constructively to understand the basis of calculation, and of course we'll continue to engage with all parties across the Chamber with regards to discussions in terms of what will be included in the forthcoming Scottish Government budget.
Concise question number 8, Brian Whittle.
Presiding Officer, as always, to ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to ensure school meals meet or exceed existing nutritional standards.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
We expect all local authorities to comply with the high standards set out in the nutritional requirements for food and drink in schools Scotland Regulations 2020, which are accompanied by supporting statutory guidance. Education Scotland Health and Nutrition Inspectors monitor school food and drink provision as part of the school inspection programme.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? I mean, school meals are a crucial way to offer a balanced nutritional meal, so important in tackling hunger, malnutrition, attainment, behavioural issues, physical and mental health. So can I ask this Cabinet Secretary if she believes the current nutritional standards are of a sufficiently high enough standard to meet these criteria?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm cognizant of time, Presiding Officer. There is a technical working group, however, which has independently advised on the development of nutritional standards. That group has had a primary focus on the health and well-being of children and young people. I'm more than happy to engage with the member on this directly, because I know it's an issue that he's raised in the Chamber previously.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The SNP's plans for a national care service have already wasted £28 million of taxpayers' money. 4 parliamentary committees have warned about its flaws. NHS bosses have serious concerns. Scotland's council leaders and unions have pooled their support. So why is the First Minister pushing ahead with a plan that nobody seems to want?
First Minister.
Officer, before I answer the substance of Russell Finlay's question, may I welcome him to his post as leader of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, and look forward to these exchanges, which will take their course over the next few weeks, months and years. On the question of the National Care Service, the National Care Service is a product of consultation and dialogue with members of the public, led by the Ferry Review. And the Ferry Review concluded that there was such variation in the quality of social care and the effectiveness of social care around the country that there was an argument and a necessity for there to be a national care service to make sure that wherever individuals are in the social care sector in the country, they are able to receive the highest quality of support. That is the foundation behind the National Care Service, and it's on that basis that the Government will pursue the proposition that we've put forward to Parliament.
So Finlay.
I thank the First Minister for his kind words, and I look forward to our exchanges. I've counted 60 until election day, but what I really hope for from the First Minister is some answers. 1 in 5 care homes have closed over the past decade, and the NHS is paying the price, with almost 2,000 people trapped in hospitals, which is the highest on record. First Minister, Scotland's care sector is collapsing today. People need action today. Every penny should be spent helping them today, not wasting years on yet another SNP pet project that is doomed to fail. So why can't the First Minister see that?
First Minister.
It's for many of the reasons that Mr Finlay puts to me that I support a national care service, because I am very, very concerned about the level of delayed discharge in our hospitals today. And it's been the focus of significant attention from me as First Minister and the Health Secretary and his ministerial team and those acting on our behalf. Let me just give Mr Finlay an illustration of why this is a problem in the country. Apart from the fact that there are nearly 2,000 people who are delayed in leaving hospital at this present moment, and we've been putting in sustained efforts, and I think the situation would have been significantly worse had we not done so. But today, per 100,000 of population in each local authority area in the country, the number of delayed discharges ranges from 9.3 in one local authority area to 108 in another, 10 times the difference. So if one local authority area can secure a delayed discharge level of 9.3 per 100,000 of population, I ask myself, Why is there a position which is 10 times worse at the other end of the spectrum? That is unfair in this country. It needs to be addressed, and that's what a National Care Service will deliver.
Russell Finlay.
The First Minister's own figures reveal that this is a today problem, and it's classic SNP, wasting time and money, neglecting what people really need. Government ministers yet again grabbing power from local communities. The National Care Service will cost billions of pounds, and that's just to set up. So how will another expensive, bloated and wasteful quango help anyone?
First Minister.
Well, one of the factors that Mr Finlay will be calculating in his cost assessment that he's just put on the record today is the fact that as part of this exercise we intend to increase the pay and remuneration for social care workers around the country. And no wonder Mr Finlay objects to that, because the Conservatives have objected to every attempt on our part to improve pay for social care workers the length and breadth of the country. So I can assure Mr Finlay that at this present moment there is significant pressure being applied to improve the delayed discharge position in local authority areas where it is poor, and we maintain that pressure on a constant basis. It occupies a huge amount of my attention and that of the Health Secretary as First Minister. Some areas are improving, but not nearly fast enough. So if we have a situation where in one local authority area it is possible for there to be only 9.3 members of the public in delayed discharge per 100,000, how is it justifiable for there to be 10 times that amount in any other part of the country? That's why we need a National Care Service.
Russell Finlay.
This really does sum up what's wrong with politics in Scotland. Plans for a National Care Service that are costing a fortune but not caring for anyone, just like the ferries that don't carry passengers and prisoners that free criminals early. This government needs a reality check. It's become disconnected from the people it's supposed to represent, like the thousands who are in need of care today. Yes. Surely it's basic common sense to ditch the SNP's National Care Service plan and just put the money directly into frontline care.
First Minister.
This government is investing in our social care system and investing in the provision of care services throughout this country in a more significant way than is provided for by the financial allocations made to Scotland by the United Kingdom Government. Now, Mr Finlay, of course, was a supporter of Liz Truss. We can...
Carry on, First Minister. Members.
Don't like it.
The Conservatives obviously don't like being reminded that Mr Finlay... The Conservatives...
We will hear the First Minister. Many members wish to put questions today. I'd like us to continue. First Minister.
The Conservatives obviously don't like hearing that Mr Finlay was a supporter of Liz Truss, whose economic and fiscal policies have undermined the public finances of Scotland. That is the reality that I'm going to point out to Mr Finlay. And what this government has done is it's taken the hard decisions to invest more in our public services, more in our health and social care services than would have been the case if we had followed the United Kingdom Government's budget allocations to Scotland. £1.5 billion more invested in our public services. So if Mr Finlay wants a lesson in reality, I will tell him that I will not follow the discredited and failed policies of the Conservative Party. We will make our choices here in Scotland to invest in our public services and to protect the people of our country.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. For years we have known that delayed discharge is exacerbating the crisis in our NHS. delayed discharge is when someone is medically cleared to leave hospital but is unable to do so due to a lack of a care package. Almost a decade and countless health ministers ago, the SNP promised to eradicate this dangerous practice. But new figures show that on average 2,000 patients were needlessly stuck in hospital every day in August, the highest number ever on record. That's the equivalent of every bed in NHS Lothian or every bed in Ninewells, Raigmore, Wishaw and Inverclyde hospitals combined. And more than £1.3 billion has been lost to delayed discharge since the SNP promised to eradicate it in February 2005. So why has this SNP government spectacularly failed to tackle this crisis?
First Minister.
As Mr Sarwar will know, there has been a significant increase in demand on our health and care services as a consequence of the COVID pandemic. That's the reality of what we are wrestling with. What the government has done in addressing that reality is that we have increased social care spending by 25%. We've delivered on our programme for government commitment to increase social care spending by 25% over this Parliament, 2 years ahead of our original target. So we've put in the extra resources because we were prepared to take the hard decision on tax, to increase public investment and to increase public expenditure. Now, I don't in any way diminish or dismiss the significance of the problem of delayed discharge. I've recounted, I've put on the record the disparity of performance around the country, which is a source of great concern to me in the performance of health and social care partnerships around the country. But what the government has done is invested in the system to ensure that we can support the system and deliver on expectations. But we face the higher demand as a consequence of COVID.
What the First Minister fails to do is measure outcomes of what's happening actually in our health and social care system. And this is a government that on outcomes has a track record of failure with devastating consequences, record levels of delayed discharge on this government's watch. Now, Scottish Labour has called for a national care service for more than a decade. And we actually welcomed when this government finally agreed to support one. But we also warned that it had to be more than a slogan. And half a decade later, and the SNP's plans are now in disarray. The fact is that their plans are just a national care service in name only that does nothing to actually fix the problem, fund a single extra care worker or improve services. It's why care unions, councils and NHS leaders are now withdrawing support and raising concerns. The SNP's plans could now cost £2.2 billion. Surely this money should be spent on care packages, additional workers, better paying conditions and actually reducing delayed discharge.
First Minister.
That is precisely what the government is doing, because I've just put on the public record that the government has increased social care spending by 25%, which was our target, and we've delivered that early. Now, members of Parliament have to accept that we have to operate within a budget that's agreed by this Parliament. Within the commitments we've made, we have increased social care expenditure so that care workers are paid more, which they are, so that we have more care workers employed, which we do, to make sure that we can deliver that care. But there is a challenge about rising demand, which is why the delayed discharge figure is so high, and we have variation in the performance between different areas in the country. So those are the realities that we are wrestling with. But what will not help us is if we reduce public expenditure or we don't have continued investment in the service. And of course, Mr Sarwar represents a position now which wants to change the position that we have on tax. He does not support the extra investment that we've generated out of tax decisions. And Mr Sarwar supports a United Kingdom government that is carrying on with austerity. We've got to break out of this austerity cycle. We need investment. This government is committed to it. I don't think Mr Sarwar is.
Anna Sarwar.
Officer, the First Minister just does not live in reality, and he is not accepting that outcomes are getting worse for people in Scotland on this government's watch. And he can try and spin the facts and blame all the others that he wants, but the truth is that his plan is an absolute disaster. Workers don't want it, experts don't want it, and warnings have been ignored for years. Their botched plans are just a power grab that will waste money, won't improve care and won't address delayed discharge, which is a key factor in the NHS crisis. We support a proper national care service, but as always with this government, no good idea ever survives their incompetence. So will the First Minister wake up to the reality in our NHS and care service, ditch this costly, unworkable bill and bring forward a credible alternative plan to fix the crisis they have created?
First Minister.
I'm interested in all that Mr Sarwar said today. Unless I misheard him, I don't think at any stage did he talk about service users. Exactly. Because service users want a national care service. That's who wants a national care service, because they are deeply concerned by the issues. They are deeply concerned by the issues that we are working to wrestle with. Now, what I would say to Mr Sarwar is the Government will engage constructively with all interested parties about the establishment of a national care service, because we want to improve outcomes for members of the public. We are committed to doing exactly that, and we will engage constructively with the Labour Party and with anybody else about their ideas about taking forward the national care service. But what we have to be aware of is that when members of Parliament come here demanding investment in our public services, they have to be prepared to support the means to make that happen. Now, that doesn't happen if members of Parliament come here and oppose what we are doing on tax. It does not happen if members of Parliament, as Mr Sarwar told me during the election campaign, say there will be no austerity and then deliver austerity in the United Kingdom government. That does not add up. That will not meet the needs of patients in our country. That will not deliver on the better outcomes for people in our country.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
The world's failure to address Israel's impunity, to protect civilians or to prevent war crimes has made escalation of violence in the Middle East inevitable. And through devolved funding decisions, the Scottish Government does have a role here. There have been far too many deaths. The brutal killings on October the 7th, genocide inflicted on the people of Gaza, and the bombardment and invasion of Lebanon, and now the world faces an imminent threat of full-scale regional war. We need immediate ceasefire in Gaza and de-escalation in the wider region, but the Prime Minister continues to provide arms and political support to Israel regardless of the consequences. Remembering that there are devolved funding decisions involved here, what is the First Minister's response to this crisis, and will he join us in calling for de-escalation and for the UK Government to end its complicity in war crimes being inflicted on Palestinians and others?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I share the deep concern that Patrick Harvey has expressed to Parliament today about the situation in the Middle East, because the calls that my predecessor and I have made for a ceasefire in Gaza for some considerable time, back to probably late October of last year, have essentially demonstrated the calls that we made then were highlighting the fact of the danger of escalation of this conflict, and that is exactly what is now happening. So, if there had been intervention to deliver a ceasefire a long time ago, we could have avoided being on the very dangerous course that we are now on. And I reiterate my call for there to be an immediate ceasefire and for all parties of goodwill to exercise their influence and responsibility to ensure that a ceasefire is brought about and there is a de-escalation of the conflict in the Middle East. All of this, of course, goes back to the atrocities that were committed by Hamas in early October 2023. All hostages should be returned, and there should be the application of a ceasefire to resolve these issues, and the development of a two-stage solution to ensure that Palestinians can live in safety in their own sovereign, independent nation. Now, Mr Harvey raises with me issues of devolved responsibility, and he and I had an exchange about this on the 30th of May 2024, and I reread that exchange this morning to satisfy myself that all steps that we can take within our legal responsibility are being taken to ensure that the concerns that Mr Harvey puts to me are properly pursued.
Patrick Harvey.
There is a responsibility on all governments to act in the face of so much violence and destruction, and I welcome the fact that the First Minister has repeated his call for ceasefire, for de-escalation and for statehood for Palestine. I hope he continues to oppose the sale of arms to Israel. But the Greens have repeatedly raised the track record of the Scottish Government in giving grants to the companies that are producing those weapons and are profiting from the killings. Tens of thousands of people have been killed, and yet companies that are arming Israel have received hundreds of thousands of pounds from Scottish enterprise. The First Minister repeatedly defends this by saying his government doesn't fund the manufacture of munitions. But this is not the point. The government is funding the companies that profit from these atrocities. Will the First Minister finally send a clear signal today by immediately banning these companies from receiving grants and supports from the Scottish Government?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I understand why Patrick Harvey puts that question to me, and I understand the basis and the substance of the point that he puts to me. But what I said back on the 30th of May 2024 was that, and I quote from the official record, we have to have a legal basis for saying, for matters that are not related to Israel-Gaza conflict, that we are not providing a grant. And that is the key legal test that the government has got to satisfy, because the government, whatever else is happening in the world, this government has got to act within the law, and it will act under the law under my leadership, because I believe fundamentally in the rule of law in all circumstances. It would help if many other people believed in the rule of law as well in resolving some of these issues. So I don't in any way dismiss the points that Patrick Harvey puts to me, but I simply say that I have to act within the law, and I will explore once again, as I've assured him, and I will keep this under review, as to whether there are any actions we can take which will properly address our legal responsibilities, but also address the moral and ethical issues that Mr Harvey fairly puts to me this afternoon.
Question number 4 has been withdrawn. Question number 5, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, in light of the recent reports of an increase in alcohol-related deaths in Scotland, what steps the Scottish Government is taking to reduce excessive drinking?
First Minister.
The recent statistics are a stark reminder of the challenge our nation faces in tackling alcohol harm. The increase of minimum unit pricing of alcohol to 65p per unit this week is an example of concrete action taken by this government to prevent alcohol harm. Research estimated that our policy saved hundreds of lives and likely averted hundreds of alcohol-attributable hospital admissions compared to what would have happened without minimum unit pricing in place. To support people already drinking at hazardous and harmful levels, the Scottish Government provided a sustained record investment of £112 million to alcohol and drug partnerships this year.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the First Minister for that response? I think whether we agree with the effectiveness of minimum unit pricing or not, I think we will agree that it's certainly not going to be a silver bullet. Presiding Officer, many people caught in excessive drinking or addiction are self-medicating to counter other traumas. If we are to effectively tackle the scourge of that addiction in Scotland, we need to recognise not only the right to recovery advocated by the Scottish Conservatives, we need to work to prevent others falling into that addiction. So does the First Minister recognise that community activities, such as youth clubs and sports clubs and music and drama and the Scouts and the Guides and all those great organisations, can also be a positive alternative form of self-medication? And if he does he further recognise that by reducing access to the activities, both in schools and the community, by closing facilities and squeezing third sector funding, makes preventing addiction that much more difficult?
First Minister.
There's a lot in Mr Whittle's question with which I agree, that there is the opportunity to have a fulfilling life that does not require any resort to alcohol or drug dependency can often be delivered by participation in many of the organisations and activities that Mr Whittle puts to me. And I can assure him, and I very much practice this in my parliamentary and ministerial activities, very strong support for the work of the third sector in many of the organisations that Mr Whittle talks about. I suppose the only note of discord I have to say is that we've got to find the money somewhere. And I keep on coming back to this point, that it's all very well for members of Parliament to come here and ask us to fund things and to fund other provision, with which I think is totally valuable. To find the resources for that without supporting us in having the means to do so. Now, Mr Whittle's party were responsible for the chaos in our public finances with which we wrestle, and the government is working our way through those challenges. But I simply appeal to Mr Whittle to follow through his commitment to encourage me to support these organisations and these activities by then supporting us and having the means to invest in these organisations through the budget process.
Colette Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Would the First Minister agree that the minimum unit pricing on alcohol has already proven itself, given that Public Health Scotland and the University of Glasgow analysis estimates that the policy has reduced alcohol deaths by 13.4% and hospital admissions by 4.1%, and in addition to innovative policies like minimum unit pricing, can the First Minister outline the actions the Scottish Government is taking to support people seeking treatment for alcohol-related issues?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I very much agree with Colette Stevenson that minimum unit pricing has been effective. There's recent commentary in the Lancet, which was a contribution by internationally renowned public health experts, that stated, and I quote, that policymakers can be confident that there are several hundred people who are alive today as a result of minimum unit pricing. Now, that's something that I think we should all welcome as the effectiveness of policy. But it's not the only instrument of policy that we have. On alcohol treatment, the Government has made available £112 million to alcohol and drug partnerships. And we have made £100 million available, or we will do over the course of this Parliament, to increase access to residential rehabilitation. And will work with stakeholders to create a new national service specification alongside guidance for alcohol treatment to try to address these issues.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The World Health Organisation estimates that more than half of children in Scotland have tried alcohol before they turn 13. What progress is the Government making on this issue, and will the First Minister commit to pursuing with some urgency policies that deliver an alcohol-free childhood?
Minister.
I agree fundamentally with the point that Carol Mockin puts to me, and the Government is, of course, taking forward a number of measures under consultation in relation to alcohol marketing, which is designed to achieve the objective that Carol Mockin understandably puts to me today. So I reassure her that that is part of the Government's programme to put in place the measures which avoid children having exposure to alcohol in their childhood, to enable us to have more positive outcomes for those young people.
Question number 6, Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is regarding whether teachers are essential to raising educational attainment and closing the poverty-related attainment gap.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Scotland's teachers are vital to driving improvements in our schools, raising attainment and closing the poverty-related attainment gap. It's for that reason that we are providing local authorities with £145.5 million in this year's budget to protect teacher numbers, and why I and the Education Secretary are committed to working with our local authority partners to ensure the best possible education for every child in Scotland.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, but he will know that not a single local authority has agreed to receive that funding. The First Minister says he believes that teachers are essential. His Cabinet Secretary says that she can't raise attainment with fewer teachers, yet 450 in Glasgow began losing their jobs. By what the First Minister just said himself, these jobs are essential. Teachers are working on average 11 hours extra, unpaid, every week. And on this Government's watch, new teachers can't get jobs. Enough is surely enough. That's why Parliament voted for my motion for the Government to intervene in this, save the jobs and bring forward a proper plan. But once again, the Government ignored the will of this Parliament. So can I ask the First Minister today, when will teachers have the stability they deserve?
First Minister.
I think the teaching profession is fundamental to our education system in Scotland. I saw that firsthand when I was Education Secretary, and I reiterate what I've put on the record today, that teachers play a critical role in the achievement of the Government's objectives on education. It's for that reason that we are making available the resources to protect teacher numbers. Pam Duncan-Glancy said to me that local authorities haven't yet agreed to accept that money. Well, a way of stabilising the teaching profession would be for local authorities to agree to accept the money that the Government has put on the table. That would be the simplest way to take things forward, and I would think that would be something that would help local authority financing by having the certainty from the Government about investing in the teaching profession, which has always been our priority. I'm very pleased that we've got to a situation where the teaching profession has accepted the pay offer that has been made through the SGNC, and that provides further stability for the teaching profession, which continues the position of the teaching profession about being the best paid teaching profession in the United Kingdom.
Emma Harper.
First Minister, Labour members time and again come to this chamber to demand more spending, while at the same time standing behind Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' austerity agenda. So does the First Minister agree with me that it's vital that the UK budget commits to investment rather than austerity, and that it is for all parties to join with the SNP in making that case to the UK Government?
First Minister, I am not entirely clear that that question related to the substantive question on the paper. I will therefore call Liam Kerr.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer. Teaching jobs instability extends to supply teacher posts. Now, recent figures from the Scottish Teachers for Permanence campaign suggest 80% of supply teachers have had little or no supply work this year, and in some councils over 60% had less than a month. Now, taken with Pam Duncan-Glancy's statistics, this all paints a picture of job insecurity, negative impact on pupil experience, financial uncertainty, and little encouragement for those seeking to join the profession. So can the First Minister provide Parliament with a published strategy to address the teacher recruitment and retention crisis, or is his government making it up as they go along?
First Minister.
Well, as Mr Kerr will know, teachers are employed by individual local authorities, and well, if we've now got to the point that the Conservative Party groans when statements of fact are put on the record, the Conservative Party is in a pretty dismal position. So,
let's hear one another.
Local authorities employ teachers, and the Government works with local authorities on workforce planning, because all of these factors are taken into account when it comes to the setting of the admission levels into initial teacher education, which is a collaboration between the Government and local authorities, which is the point I was going to make before the groaning started from the Conservative benches. So that is the workforce planning that is undertaken within Scotland to make sure that we have a sufficient supply of qualified teachers to contribute to the education profession. So that's the work that's undertaken. I'll ask the Education Secretary to reflect on whether there's further refinements are required in the light of Mr Kerr's question. But we do undertake workforce planning because it informs the admission to initial teacher education, which is critical to make sure we have all the skills necessary for our teaching profession in Scotland.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Over recent weeks, a number of constituents have contacted me regarding concerning incidents that have taken place on Scottish Government-owned land in Granton. Most worryingly, a fire was started that damaged a substation and left local residents without an electricity supply for many hours. The land is designated for an exciting new development by National Gallery Scotland, which I hope will proceed soon. In the meantime, however, my constituents and I would be grateful if the First Minister and colleagues could quickly consider how the Scottish Government can take more action to secure the land, to reduce risk, criminality and antisocial behaviour in the area.
First Minister.
Officer, understand the concerns that Mr Macpherson raises on behalf of his constituents, and I give him the assurance that we will do all that we can to encourage the securing of this particular site. We'll work very closely with the City of Edinburgh Council and Police Scotland to identify solutions to the challenges that are faced in the Granton area. As Mr Macpherson knows, the project for the National Galleries is an important commitment on the Government's behalf, and we look forward to taking the necessary steps to secure that site in advance of the development of that particular site.
Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As part of Dyslexia Awareness Week, Dyslexia Scotland and the University of Glasgow yesterday published a hard-hitting research project looking at the experience of 1,400 adults with dyslexia. The report highlights a number of areas of concern, including challenges in obtaining an adult assessment with formal education. 80% of participants said this cost to getting this assessment was preventing them from having their dyslexia identified, and 3/4 said it was negatively impacting them in the workplace. These concerns have been raised numerous times before, with little progress. So will the First Minister agree to meet with Dyslexia Scotland and a cross-party group of MSPs to discuss the findings, and will he finally agree that the Scottish Government should fund these important assessments for all adults?
First Minister.
President Officer, I am familiar with the research that Mr Mundell puts to me, and I acknowledge the significance of the issue of dyslexia where that is not identified and not supported as a consequence. So I'm very happy to agree to meet with Mr Mundell and with Dyslexia Scotland. I've had engagement with the organisation in the past, and I would welcome a continuation of that dialogue. Obviously, there are financial implications of putting in place of meeting the costs of the assessments that Mr Mundell puts to me, but we will have those discussions and identify what further actions the Government can take to support the legitimate aspirations that Mr Mundell puts to me.
Jackie Bailey.
The First Minister will be aware of my constituent who died last week in an industrial accident in Southampton. His death will be subject to a coroner's inquest, which will be months away, and an interim death certificate is issued by the coroner as a matter of course. But legislation passed here in 2015 only allows full death certificates to be accepted for burials and cremations in Scotland. So my constituent cannot be brought home for burial or cremation, which obviously compounds his family's distress. Can I thank the Health Secretary for his positive engagement on this issue, but can I ask the First Minister what can he do to resolve this matter urgently, and will he specifically consider whether Health Improvement Scotland, who provide a death certification review service, can act in this case?
First Minister.
Sir, I'm familiar with this case, and first of all, I want to say that I sympathise very much with the family involved, and I understand that this circumstance will just add to the distress that they are suffering. Jackie Bailey received a reply from the Health Secretary last night on this question, and I do assure her that we are in touch with the relevant authorities to try to find a way through this, to try to resolve the issue. I don't have a solution as yet, but I assure her that we are actively working to try to ensure that is the case and to do it as swiftly as we possibly can do.
Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, on the 27th of September, the Afghan Embassy in the UK closed, leaving 280,000 strong Afghan diaspora in the UK, including constituents of mine and families across Scotland, without consular services such as passport facilities which enable travel. For the avoidance of doubt, Presiding Officer, the consular services were provided by a small and committed staff team who remained loyal to the now toppled democratically elected government and who rejected the Taliban completely. This closure will have a detrimental impact on many families who have made their lives and homes here in Scotland. Can I ask the First Minister to make direct representations to the UK Government to see how they may be able to support the reopening of the embassy and with it the restoration of consular services?
First Minister.
President Officer, I appreciate the difficulty that Mr Doris puts to me, and I'm very happy to confirm that we will make representations to the United Kingdom Government on that basis to see what can be achieved here. It's a deeply regrettable situation that the Afghan embassy faced closure following the dismissal of its staff by the Taliban government. Individuals should have access to representation by their government, and they should be supported in ensuring their needs are met. And I give Mr Doris the assurance that we will make those representations to the United Kingdom Government to determine how these issues can be resolved. I would also make the point, since Mr Doris raises this issue with me about the Afghan population in Scotland, that their contribution to our country is deeply valued. They are citizens who are welcome here, and we want to do everything that we can to ensure they can contribute to our society and they can be well supported in so doing.
Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Police officers from across Scotland have been holding a silent demonstration in front of the Parliament this morning, with many officers currently in the gallery. Years of brutal cuts from the Scottish Government had left hard-working police officers doing their jobs with one hand tied behind their back. As a consequence, police officer numbers are at their lowest since 2007. Therefore, I would like to ask the First Minister if he recognises that police officers feel undervalued and overworked, and will he commit to a fair pay deal in line with other public sector workers?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I am very happy to put on the record that I value enormously the contribution made by police officers to our lives in Scotland. They are essential contributors to the safety of members of the public, and they provide a pivotal and essential role that is highly valued by me as First Minister and by the Scottish Government. Police pay is negotiated through two separate processes: the Police Negotiating Board for Scotland for officers and the Joint National Consultative Committee for staff. Pay claims have now been submitted for both police officers and police staff and will be progressed through the relevant negotiating processes, and it's therefore that process will resolve the issues that Pam Gossel puts to me. Our police officers in Scotland have consistently been the best paid in the United Kingdom at the minimum and the maximum of each rank. This recognises the hard work and the valuable contribution they make daily, as well as our commitment to investing in policing. And on police numbers, there is recruitment underway just now which is designed to boost police numbers, and of course the statistics on that will be published in due course.
Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, in the light of the disruption arising from the closure of the Princess Alexandra Eye Pavilion for the next 6 months, can the First Minister confirm what financial support the Scottish Government has committed to provide to NHS Lothian to ensure that no patient loses out now and in the future?
First Minister.
I understand the significance of the issue that Sarah Boyack puts to me. The Health Secretary has been actively engaged on this issue, and there will be a briefing to members of Parliament tomorrow on the subject. We are in discussion with NHS Lothian about the arrangements to ensure the continuity of service to individuals that will be affected by the closure because of the structural issues that we have to confront. And the Health Secretary will keep members of Parliament updated about the steps being taken to make sure the concerns that Sarah Boyack puts to me are properly and fully addressed.
Willie Rennie.
Almost two-thirds of teachers surveyed in Fife are considering leaving the profession as a result of violence in schools. So what can the First Minister say to those teachers to keep them teaching, and what precisely has changed as a result of the recently published government guidance on behaviour?
First Minister.
I think the first thing is to say that I understand the concerns of members of the teaching profession, and those concerns are taken seriously within the Government. That's why we brought forward the proposals and the mechanisms that were available to the teaching profession at the start of the school year. The Education Secretary announced all of those changes. There are now a greater range of responsibilities and opportunities for the teaching profession to exercise, to be exercised by the teaching profession to ensure that schools remain safe places for all, which they should be in all circumstances. The local authorities have been part of the process of formulating those proposals, and they are obviously, as the employers of teachers, available to support teachers in exercising the responsibilities that they need to exercise to keep schools safe.
Emma Roddick.
It is vital that we continue to take action to tackle the housing emergency, and the £22 million investment this week into the Charitable Bronze programme to increase investment in affordable homes will play an important role in this. Can the First Minister outline the impact of the UK Government's savage cut to the availability of the type of funding known as financial transactions on the Scottish Government's wider ability to invest in housing under the limited powers of devolution?
Minister.
So the specific point on financial transactions is very important for the Affordable Housing Supply Programme budget, because we experienced a 62% cut to financial transactions by the last United Kingdom Government. Now, this financial mechanism was crucial in enabling the Affordable Housing Programme to be sustained at the previous level, and it has largely accounted for the falls in investment that's available. Now, we've made representations to the United Kingdom Government. I've raised this with both the Chancellor and the Deputy Prime Minister to secure a change to that approach, and we will get the answer to that point in the budget on the 30th of October. But what I would say to Emma Roddick is that these investment streams are absolutely crucial to enabling us to sustain our investment in affordable housing, but the Government is also deploying innovation to ensure that some of the other mechanisms that we've developed on charitable bonds, or the work that's now in place in relation to the negotiation around providing financial support to bring void properties back into use, demonstrates some of the flexibility that we are trying to put in place to address the housing challenges that we face around Scotland.
Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, it is now over 3 years since the SNP government announced a review into the dualling of the A96. The review is nearly 2 years late, and their delaying tactic has cost taxpayers almost £6 million. On Friday, an air ambulance had to be called to yet another harrowing collision just outside Huntly. So can the First Minister stop playing political games with people's lives and tell us when the review will finally be published?
First Minister.
The Government has made clear our commitments in relation to the A96, including dualling the A96 between Inverness and Nairn and the Nairn bypass, and there is a review underway in relation to the remainder of the route. That will be concluded in due course, and Parliament will be advised of its implications. The Government is committed to ensuring that we take measures to address road safety in all parts of the country. The Transport Secretary is focused on those measures and has put in place a range of practical steps to ensure that that is the case.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Katie Clark, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.
Okay, the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 12723 in the name of Katie Clark on Ardrossan Harbour. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I invite Katie Clark to open the debate around 7 minutes. Ms Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm very grateful to all members who have signed the motion to enable this debate to take place. Ardrossan has been the main ferry port to Arran for 190 years because the Ardrossan to Brodick route is the shortest, quickest and most convenient way to get to and from Arran for most people. Infrastructure has built up around the port at Ardrossan, including transport, such as railway links, and the town's economy is heavily dependent on the ferry route. 8 years ago next month, MSPs and local councillors from various political parties joined members of the public and businesses to demonstrate the fierce backing to have the retention of the Ardrossan to Brodick ferry route. The A to B campaign was launched in response to the then Transport Minister Hamza Yousaf's announcement that there would be a wide-ranging feasibility study to examine the future of the Arran route, following a bid to move the service from Ardrossan to Troon. The study looked at the options under 4 broad pillars: connectivity, reliability, overall operational cost and socio-economic considerations. And having looked at all of the evidence, the decision was taken to retain Ardrossan as the mainland port for the Arran ferry service, as this was clearly the best option. Fast forward to now, 8 years from the launch of the Keep It A to B campaign, and again local residents, businesses and groups in Arran and Ardrossan still not have any certainty that their lifeline ferry service will continue from Ardrossan Harbour due to the disastrous failure to commence work at Ardrossan. The 2 new ferries, the Sanix and the Rosa, should have come into service in 2018 and 2019, but despite both ferries being delayed for over 5 years, the harbour work has not started and there has been no tender process to ascertain costs. The Scottish Government decided to commission the Sanix and Rosa with a design that required the reconfiguration and upgrading of Ardrossan to enable the vessels to berth. They knew they didn't have the infrastructure in place with ports and indeed fuel. This commissioning decision meant that decisions had to be made about the future of the port. The port is owned by Peel, and it was obvious to those experienced with that owner that there may be problems with coming to a decision that Peel would agree with. So despite the ferries being more than 5 years late, no work has started at Ardrossan. The delay of these 2 ferries has already cost the local economy millions of pounds on the island of Arran, which of course is heavily dependent on tourism. In Ardrossan, which has some of the most beautiful beaches and views along our coast, we also suffer from some of the worst deprivation in North Ayrshire, and moving the ferry service would surely tear the heart out of the town. The Sanix started berthing trials at Brodick this week, and hopefully that service will start later this year, but that will not be going to Ardrossan. It's been rerouted to Troon, and there's real concern that the ferry service will never come back to Ardrossan. Presiding Officer, last night, more than 340 people, residents, businesses and other supporters met in the Ardrossan Civic Centre at the inaugural meeting to launch the Save Ardrossan Harbour campaign. Many more were unable to get into the room. It feels like Groundhog Day. 8 years on from the Keep It A to B campaign, 8 years on from the argument being won on Ardrossan, 8 years on, and local people still can't get an assurance from the Scottish Government that there is a cast-iron commitment to keep the Arran ferry service operating out of Ardrossan in the future. It's also now been 6 years since Transport Scotland approved proposals to redevelop Ardrossan Harbour. Constituents rightly feel angry and frustrated. You couldn't make this up. We've had enough time wasting. We've had enough excuses. I have no doubt that the work would have been completed by now if the port had been in public ownership, which is why Labour have been calling for the port to be brought into public ownership for a number of years. The future of Ardrossan as a ferry port with integrated ScotRail train services must be preserved. We must get that commitment from the Scottish Government, and I'd be glad to take an intervention from the local member.
Kenneth Gibson.
Before taking an intervention, since harbour privatisation in 1992, Labour's controlled the Council for 26 years, Westminster for 13 years, it was in control here for 8 years, and she was local MP for a decade. So why is it still in private hands, and will the UK Labour Government set aside the Subsidy Control Act to enable investment in Ardrossan Harbour?
Katie Clark.
As the member is well aware, this is a devolved matter, and as he also knows, the Labour group in North Ayrshire and the North Ayrshire administration was asking to be allowed to take the port into municipal ownership for a number of years because of the horrific impact that the delay of the redevelopment of Ardrossan is having on the local economy. The lack of investment in Ardrossan Harbour and the lack of investment in our ageing ferry fleet is a national emergency. It's been a national embarrassment for this Scottish Government, and it's been a disaster for businesses and residents in Ardrossan and on Arran. Presiding Officer, my constituents in Ardrossan and Arran deserve an apology. They deserve the Scottish Government to commit to providing an adequate support package to cover the cost of these delays. They deserve a reliable ferry service on the fastest route that they can count on. But most of all today, they deserve a cast-iron commitment that the Scottish Government are committed to Ardrossan being the preferred route for the Arran service, and a guarantee that the much-needed works to the harbour will be underway as soon as possible. I sincerely hope that the Minister can give my constituents that commitment and that guarantee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Clark. We move to the open debate. I call first Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Jamie Green. Around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I congratulate Ms Clark on securing this important debate on the Ardrossan Harbour development project. Last night I was the only MSP to participate at a packed public meeting in Ardrossan Civic Centre called by Save Ardrossan Harbour. Local residents who encapsulate the frustration and strength of feeling at the seemingly never-ending saga of the harbour's redevelopment. I was the 267th person to arrive, and soon after, the doors had to be closed with many left outside. Emotions run high as local business people and residents spoke passionately about the harbour and its vital importance to the town and North Ayrshire. Ardrossan Harbour isn't just a port serving Arran for 190 years, it's a key pillar of the town's economy. Prior to the pandemic, the Scottish Government's introduction of road equivalent tariff and huge increase in traffic that followed the massive reduction in fares, still barely half what they were when the SNP came to office, meant 850,000 passengers travelled to Brodick annually, supporting 165 jobs. When redevelopment was first mooted with Troon potential an alternative port in 2017, the entire Ardrossan community backed cross-party by North Ayrshire Council for a magnificent and successful campaign to retain the ferry permanently at Ardrossan. Despite unwavering commitments from Scottish ministers to Ardrossan since, the communities of Ardrossan and Arran have been left in the dark and starved of information as redevelopment has been repeatedly delayed. I know how they feel. I acknowledge some commercial confidentiality, but at last night's meeting, the lack of transparency and communication was clearly a source of immense frustration for Ardrossan residents and Arranachs relying on ferry services who understandably feel beleaguered at the abysmal service they currently endure. Cast iron commitments given by the Scottish Government, North Ayrshire Council and Peer Ports to the harbour project year after year have yet to see shovels in the ground. The case for Ardrossan shouldn't be restated, but must be. Ardrossan is the shortest route in time and distance, enabling more sailings to be carried out daily. It's the only port with adequate public transport links to the ferry. Essential NHS and care workers are among the many who commute daily to Arran. Ardrossan is by far the most economic option. Brit Associates calculated in 2017 that switching the service to affluent Troon would cost Calmac 4.9 times more than Ardrossan over 30 years, £118.1 million, compared to £24.1 million for Ardrossan. Since then, inflation has widened that gap. Given Ardrossan's deep-rooted deprivation, there is an indisputable socio-economic case for retaining the service there. Stranraer provides a stark and worrying glimpse of life without the ferry. Would be for Ardrossan. In November 2011, the Northern Ireland ferry was relocated from Stranraer to Cairnryan. Stranraer's economy contracted by a staggering 26% the following year, with annual contractions of 3% since. So why, 7 years on, has work still to commence at Ardrossan? I don't believe that it's a lack of trying by North Ayrshire Council or Scottish ministers. The Scottish Government has invested over £142 million in port and harbour infrastructure across 26 Clyde and Hebrides ferry ports since 2012, including £20 million in Brodick, redeveloped 6 years ago. A tender likely to come in at £8 to £10 million for a new Cumbria slip is currently being progressed. Why not Ardrossan? The key difference is that the Tories privatised Ardrossan Harbour in 1992. And I'll happily take an intervention from Mr Green if he wishes to explain what benefits privatisation has brought to Ardrossan, or apologises for the selling of this strategic asset. Right, we'll hear it next. If Ms Clark wants to make an intervention, I'm happy to take it.
Katie Clark.
It was indeed myself that was asking for an intervention. To ask the member whether he agrees that the port should have been brought into municipal ownership, because, as he says, there's been considerable investment in ports, and that Peels seem to be the problem at Ardrossan. That seems to be accepted, I think, probably by everybody in the chamber, and that really we need that port in public ownership. It would have been better if that had happened some time ago to enable progress to be made.
As I mentioned, the Labour Party had plenty of opportunities to bring it into public ownership. Of course, the local authority under Labour control also promised to take it into ownership local banks, bus services and energy, and did none of these things. The reality is, if you speak to Spice, they will tell you that it's actually dubious whether or not this can actually be achieved under devolution. But her UK government, if it so wishes, could ensure this went back into public ownership. Peel Port's lack of investment in their own asset has held Ardrossan hostage while causing operational difficulties and a decline in ferry resilience and reliability. The Irish berth essential in Easterly Winds was neglected under its sudden closure, while the Arran berth has had fenders fall into the Clyde. Despite receiving harbour dues of £15.48 million in the decade from 2013, Peel has failed to maintain and upgrade their harbour or engage with the local community. Of course, if the harbours are not being developed, Peel will lose their revenue stream. Presiding Officer, Ardrossan Harbour is now at a critical juncture. With MV Glensannox being handed over in the coming weeks, the endless delays and uncertainty must end. We know the UK Government has cut available capital by 20%. The Subsidy Control Act limits the room for manoeuvre, and that renationalisation is extremely difficult under devolution. Nevertheless, it's time to bring this long-delayed business case to light and lay out a clear and transparent plan with timescales for action. The people of Ardrossan and Arran deserve nothing less.
Thank you. I now call Jamie Green to be followed by Paul Sweeney. Around 4 minutes. Mr Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I can assure Mr Gibson I will address the very issues that he made in his speech, and actually thank him for his speech. I think there's lots to agree already in what's been said. I'm sure there'll be more to come. But I'll be honest, I'm not going to mince my words today, because I think that people are angry. And I think that sense of palpable anger has been building up over the years. I'm not just angry, it's constituents of the entire west coast of Scotland who've been let down. They're Katie Clark's constituents, they're my constituents, they're Kenneth Gibson's constituents. But it's our islanders most, I think, who are angry. They're angry because we're still debating this issue today. We're still debating the delivery of ferries, we're still debating the quality of our local ports. I'm also angry that we always have to use opposition time to bring up these issues in the absence of any government debates. And I hope that's something the government will reflect on. I'm also angry that 7 months after the closure of the Irish berth at Ardrossan, that an impasse leaves us no closer to any resolution. to that part of the port. Last week when I brought this up in this chamber, probably standing just about here, the Cabinet Secretary wanted to stress, I quote, her deep sense of frustration about the issue. What an understatement. I can assure the chamber and anyone in the gallery today that no one in the SNP government is anywhere near as frustrated as the islanders and the ferry users themselves. They deserve much more than apologies. They deserve simply to be treated as every other Scot would be in such a circumstance. I can't believe it's been 7 years. 7 years since the Scottish Government said that, yes, it will retain Ardrossan as the main Arran port. And that original campaign, the A to B, the Save Ardrossan Harbour campaign, was a true, genuine cross-party effort from trade union movements, all the political parties, local businesses and local campaigners and activists, all fighting against that move of the service to Troon, which was a very real threat. 8 years on, it's still not just a real threat, it's a real possibility. Of course, that campaign made complete sense, because you can step off the Arran ferry straight onto a ScotRail train, up to Glasgow. You can be on the motorway and into the Central Belt in just minutes. So it made complete sense. And I apologise to the organisers I wasn't able to make last night's meeting due to 2 cross-party groups I attended. But actually, there shouldn't have been a need for a meeting such as that. I remember the original 2016 meeting in the very same building that I attended, packed out to the rafters with people with the very same concerns that I'm sure were listed last night. Back in 2017, I asked the then Transport Minister, Hamza Youssef, who went on to greater and bigger things, what would happen of the Glen Sannox and its ability to port, to berth at Ardrossan Port. Of course, we were reassured that every stakeholder was pulling out all stops to get that right. In fact, on the 11th of April 2018, he said the following: the Scottish Government is committed to ensuring that the Arran Ferry service is fit for the future. These plans will help bring greater resilience and reliability to the link. Resilience and reliability. Now, that's visible in today's debate, because vessel breakdowns and repairs, the closure of the Irish berth, the annual overhauls, the late delivery of the Glen Sannox, which I've just heard has now been further delayed due to problems with sea trials. I'm sure there'll be more to talk about that in the future. And we're relying on a vessel now that's approaching the end of its life, and another one which has been leased at eye-watering costs, so much so you could probably have bought a new ferry for the same price. The way I compare this when I talk to people about this issue is if you took a town with a similar population in the centre of Scotland. If you took, I don't know, Cumbernauld, and suddenly it was disconnected by road or rail due to infrastructure failings, these problems would have been remedied in days or weeks, if not months. But yet 8 years on, Arran, because it's an island, of course, is simply just to put up and shut up. And we know the cost that comes to its economy. There are estimates that up to £13,000 is lost to the local economy every single time a ferry is cancelled. Multiply that by the thousands of cancellations, well, do the math on that. In the closing time I have, I don't really want to get into the blame game. Is it CalMac's fault? Is it Peel Port's fault? Is it North Ayrshire Council's fault? I think that all the stakeholders involved have not sat round the table. Of course, the government themselves cannot simply remove themselves from responsibility, because they made the promise in the first place. Promise made and a promise broken. But I will close with this warning. There's a very real and genuine concern that the current move, temporary albeit, to Troon may become a permanent feature of that route, and the ferry will be lost from Ardrossan forever, and the devastating impact that will have on the economy of North Ayrshire. If that happens, the people of North Ayrshire will never forgive this government.
Thank you. I now call the final speaker in open debate, Paul Swinney, again, around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I congratulate my colleague, Ms Clark, for bringing this motion for members' business, which I was happy to support. And I think she adequately and comprehensively outlined the specific situation at Ardrossan, as other colleagues across the chamber have done. But indeed, as has been hinted by previous speeches, this is a symptom of a broader issue, particularly on the west coast of Scotland, that is quite unique amongst European countries, whereby effectively our major ports have been privatised, as they have been for over 30 years now. The Clyde Port Authority, which was originally established through the merger of the Clyde Navigation Trust, the Greenock Harbour Trust and the Clyde Lighthouses Trust in 1966, was managed as a trust port, effectively a form of local authority, democratically managed and democratically accountable, until it was privatised under a basically a statutory instrument of Parliament in 1992, the Clyde Port Authority scheme, with no real debate or any real public scrutiny at the time. It was done in a very surreptitious manner and effectively transferred the ownership of the entire port infrastructure and entire harbour authority responsibilities to Clyde Port Limited, a subsidiary of the Clyde Port Authority. This was then subject to a management buyout in 1992 and was floated on the London Stock Exchange in December 1994 as Clyde Port plc. This was then acquired by a private company, Peel Ports, in 2003, who remain its owners. The difficulty with this is the scale of its ownership. It is the largest port authority by geographic area in the UK, covering 450 square miles of Scotland, its territory and marine inshore land. It operates major infrastructure that the West Coast economy depends on: Greenock Ocean Terminal, the King George V Dock in Glasgow, the Hunterston Terminal, Ardrossan Harbour, Greenock Cruise Terminal and Inchgreen Dry Dock, amongst other assets. So it is critical not just for the operation of lifeline ferry services, but for the entire economic development of the west of Scotland. And this has been something that has been lacking as a subject of debate in this Parliament for some time. We do have a unique system in Scotland whereby we have three types of port ownership models. We have private ports, of which Clyde Port is one, trust ports and local authority ports. But the big problem with the privatised system of ports is that whilst other countries are able to plan and invest in new port capacity in a coherent manner, for example aligning ferry procurement with port infrastructure development, the state has basically abandoned its regulatory role in the case in Scotland. So port owners who are private are effectively given port regulatory functions that should be state functions. And in the UK, privatised ports have effectively been allowed to regulate themselves inevitably in their own interest. And this is the case in the Clyde, the Forth and the Tay. Yes, happy to give way.
Jamie Green.
I actually agree. I think we should have a proper and fulsome debate with more time to look at the issue of port infrastructure in Scotland. And I think there's probably quite a lot to agree on, actually, in answer to some of the other points made. But my concern about all of this is that, given the current state of public finances, that even if all our ports were nationally owned and operated and not held in any private ownership at all, the lack of funds to invest in that port infrastructure would leave us exactly the same place, if not a worse place, than we are at the moment. So I don't see that being the magic solution to the problem.
Paul Swinney, I can give you the time back.
Thank the member for making that point. And he is making an interesting point. It's important to recognise that we shouldn't make the perfect the enemy of the good. We are where we are, and it's about charting a coherent way forward. I would say we can achieve a better equilibrium in Scotland through improved regulation. There are two main pieces of legislation that are extant at the moment. The Harbours Act of 1964, which can give Scottish ministers power to reconstitute harbour authorities by a harbour revision order or indeed a harbour closure order in extreme circumstances. And there's also the Marine Navigation Act of 2013, which allows the Scottish ministers to remove a harbour authority's pilotage duties. So there are legislative tools available for further discussion. But what I would urge the Minister to consider is maybe perhaps an analogy with the bus regulation approach that we've been taking in recent years, where we had the privatisation of buses in the 1980s, and we've now been looking through the 2019 Act at improving regulations. It's not necessarily about nationalising bus companies and so on, but it's about having an equilibrium, perhaps with franchising or some sort of oversight. And certainly with the new Clyde mission and the Glasgow City region, there is a mechanism there to perhaps establish a better oversight and governance of the Clyde Port Authority, and I'm sure that Peel would be happy to cooperate with that in the view that it could help cohere investment and actually attract perhaps pension funds or others to invest in development of the Clyde's infrastructure. We've seen a rush of investment to the East Coast ports with the ScotWind programmes, but we've seen a dearth of investment on the West Coast. We've seen some recent improvements at the Greenock Ocean Terminal, and perhaps hints at investment at Hunterston and Inchgreen, but Ardrossan is a desert of investment, and that has been a disaster for the local community and the wider Clyde economy. So I would urge the Minister to consider a deeper dive into this and a deeper look at this opportunity for improving regulation of the West Coast ports, because it's not just about improving services to local communities, it's about growing the entire national economy. And with 450 square miles under effective private fiefdom, we need to look at improving that jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Swinney. I now invite Jim Fairley to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'd very much like to congratulate Katie Clark on securing this debate. And it raises a really important issue about the Ardrossan Harbour redevelopment project and its progress. Now, I have to say the Cabinet Secretary would very much like to have been here today to talk about this important issue, but unfortunately she is in London meeting with UK ministers, which we should accept as a good thing. But before I respond to the motion raised, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge, as others have, the service to Arran that has been subject to significant disruption with the outage of the MV Caledonia and Isles this year. And Jamie Green talked about the government doesn't know the frustration of the locals. I can assure the member I have spoken to the locals on Arran. I absolutely get it. I've run a business, and when something is out with your control, which is causing you major issues, I absolutely get the point that he is making. The Cabinet Secretary engaged directly with CalMac on that matter to understand what mitigation was being put in place, and she updated Parliament on this response to Jamie Green's topical question last week. The replacement parts have been ordered. CalMac anticipate a repair timeline of up to 10 days upon receipt of those parts, noting that the Isle of Arran is now in dry dock, as this was a pre-scheduled and regrettably could not be changed. Although the charter of the MV Alfred and continued operation of the secondary route has helped to partly mitigate this, as ministers we are keen to ensure that the community is getting the capacity and the level of service that it requires. We would also like to thank CalMac and the community for the expedient work in ensuring that the Arran services continue with the redeployment of the Hebridean Isles. Now, this change does mean that capacity in the Isla route is affected, and that service will be supported by both the MV Finlaggan and the Lord of the Isles. Unfortunately, that's impacted on the Lochboisley service, but CalMac have acted quickly to ensure that additional services from today using the MV Isle of Mull operate in a combined service to Lochboisley. So I also want to thank these communities for their... Give me 2 seconds. I also want to thank these communities for their input as CalMac utilises this route prioritisation matrix to consider the options available. And despite people's obvious frustrations, I hope that members recognise the efforts to support Arran services while the MV Calais Isles is receiving its repairs, and I hope that it returns to service very soon. I'll take the intervention.
Clark.
I'm grateful for the Minister, and I hope that he is going to come on to the issue that we're debating today, which is Ardrossan Harbour, because we're in a position where Ardrossan Harbour is going to lose its ferry service completely, and I hope that the Minister is going to have time to respond fully on the issues raised there. Minister.
Clearly, Katie Clark did not see my papers, which is exactly what I was about to come on to. So, I acknowledge the call for a commitment to Ardrossan in today's motion. As ministers, we have already given prior commitment to retain the Ardrossan Harbour following the initial 2017 exercise. But as the Cabinet Secretary for Transport has previously highlighted, this must be underpinned by a robust business case, budget availability and commitment from the other funding partners. I think it's helpful to outline some of the key changes to the project across the timeline involved. The work commenced with the creation of the Ministerial Task Force to oversee the works in 2016, and this remains ongoing. And we fully accept that this has taken longer than we had hoped. Yes, I will.
Thank you very much, Minister, for taking an intervention. The Cabinet Secretary for Transport said that a statement would be made on the business case very shortly. That was 30 days ago. We still don't have a date when that statement is going to be made. Now, you talk about these partners. What people are concerned about, my constituents and constituents of all of us here, is that we're all being kept in the dark. What are the issues? What are the bottlenecks? And what is the Scottish Government doing to resolve this? And when is it going to be resolved?
Minister.
Okay, I thank Kenny Gibson for that intervention. If he allows me to progress this, I will hopefully give him some answers to some of the questions he's asked. In 2017, there was a commitment made by Scottish ministers that Ardrossan would remain the long-term port for the Arran service, but further work was required to finalise the project. The design and planning stage progressed following receipt of commercial case from the partners Peel Ports Group and North Ayrshire Council, with the design of the berth orientation being confirmed in April of 2019. Now, the berth realignment was a substantial change to the original design, and although agreed by all partners, it did also mean that there was significant additional funding was required from the Scottish Government to facilitate that development. As members are aware, the original proposals to be fully funded by North Ayrshire Council and Peel Ports, although CMAL would fund some elements around the passenger access system and the LNG tank. Now, the project also requires legal agreement to underpin the investment by partners and to ensure that the arrangements for the future use of the port and robust that the future use of the port is robust and reflects the operations at other ports across the network. Now, the funding contribution for the Scottish Government also needs to align with the requirements and the intervention rate restrictions required by the UK Subsidy Control Act. Discussions on these elements are progressing, but further work is required to finalise them. The Ministers expect all partners to continue with these discussions in parallel with the completion of the business case. The project partners worked collaboratively to progress the project to the tender procurement stage. However, in August 2023, Scottish Minister made the difficult decision to postpone the procurement and to undertake a business case and exercise review. This was not the decision that was taken lightly. Let me make some progress. It was not a decision that was taken lightly, as the process of finalising the tender design and documents had highlighted inherent financial and project risks that remain a challenge for the main funding partners. On top of these concerns was the global escalation of construction costs, which compounded matters, resulting in the Scottish Government's contribution doubling since the initial estimate. Now, there is still uncertainty with regards to construction risks and costs that need to be addressed. As the ferry service will not operate from Ardrossan during the construction period, Scottish Ministers invested in Troon to provide a temporary facility, which has had other benefits in supporting the service during recent disruption and ensuring the port can be used as an alternative port in the longer term, as it could offer more frequent services than the current Gourock alternative. The Transport Scotland have led on coordination of the business case review and cost exercise and has continued to work closely with the project partners to progress this. However, this has proved to be a challenging process. Given the scale and importance of the investment, it is essential that we get the business case right. Additional work to support the case includes a socio-economic assessment, a structural assessment of the stability and the integrity of the port infrastructure that will support the LNG tank. More recently, a valuation of the terminal building has been commissioned, and all of this work will help finalise the position on the financial packages from each of the main funding partners. The complexity of this project, noting the changes to the original commercial case and a project cost, cannot be underestimated. Now, I would reiterate the message that the business case is substantially complete, and the Transport Scotland are working with funding partners to finalise this as quickly as practicable. A meeting of the task force will be reconvened soon, after the business case and cost exercise review has been submitted to Ministers for a decision. Yes, I'll take another.
So, to clarify that the issue that's holding this whole thing up is the funding partners, Appeal, North Ayrshire and Scottish Government, agreeing how much each pay and how much the total cost of this project is, which last August Turner and Townsend estimated at £92 million.
Minister.
All I can say at this point is there are a number of factors that need to be agreed, but a meeting of the task force will be reconvened soon after the business case and cost exercise review has been submitted to Ministers for a decision. Excuse me. Finally, I note the calls from some for a change of ownership of the port, as though that is something that can just be made to happen overnight. And while I understand the community's frustrations, the reality is quite different and the process is complex. It's important that we work through the current business case to ensure the case for development is fully considered, and again, the funding requirements, affordability and the subsidy control issues all need to be addressed. Presiding Officer, I want to close by stressing that the Cabinet Secretary is absolutely determined to bring this work to a conclusion as quickly as she possibly can. And I hope that remarks here today have helped to provide an indication of the active and complex work that is underway to ensure that Ministers have all the information needed to finalise this important decision. I reiterate that there is a strong and robust business case required, and confirmation of the wider funding packages is essential in this process. Now, I've taken 4 already. I'm going to push on. We fully understand the importance of this matter to ensuring the most resilient ferry service to and from Arran, and I want to give my absolute assurance to the people and businesses in and around Ardrossan and also in Arran of this Government's absolute commitment to finding a solution that works and progressing that as soon as we possibly can. We will update Parliament and the communities as soon as this is the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:30.